When we look at the run-up to World War I, a lot of what we see happening today is very similar. There are many disconcerting parallels. The only one of the big differences is that when you analyze how World War I was orchestrated, because it was contrived deliberately, you go away with the impression that people who were doing this in London, primarily, but also in Paris and in St. Petersburg, that they were extremely clever, that they have done, genius-level planning and scheming and these intrigues that all kind of brought the whole system closer and closer and closer to an irreversible outbreak of war. We see attempts to do the same here, only it's not clever. They seem to be making it up as they go along because Plan A failed long ago. What's happening today is the opposite. The same push toward confrontation is there, but with improvisation. Instead of discipline, you see panic. Plan A failed. Plan B never existed. And now, they're writing Plan C through Z on the fly. The Plan A was we provoke Russia into a quagmire of Ukraine. The West combined. West unites. We all together go to war against Russia. We hit them with nuclear sanctions, largest package of sanctions ever imposed on any country in history. And we basically break the back of Russia. UK, Vladimir Putin falls and we take over. We stole, Alexei Navalny, or some new version of Boris Yeltsin. And then Russia is ours. And then, we run the whole preparation to go against China and Iran. That plan failed almost immediately. Plan A wasn't some mystery. It was simple, brutal, and unbelievably arrogant. Lure Russia into Ukraine. Them, economically, topple Putin. We have now is grasping at straws. And they're looking desperately into escalating the war to try to put together a united front of NATO, a combined West against Russia. And they're looking for any pretext, any excuse. Russian vessels in international waters is pointing lasers at our planes. Well, obviously, we have to go to war. Obviously, you're going to have to sacrifice your children. Obviously, we have to again go through a complete and total destruction of the whole European continent, with tens of millions of victims. We can't have Russians pointing lasers at a plane. That's an outrage that we shall never be able to put up with. And so it's very dumb. And listen to the absurdity. Millions that parents of young men and young men across Europe are not convinced. There has to be strong psychological preparation for war. People have to feel that if they're going to fight and die, if Parents are going to risk sacrificing their children. There has to be, for a just cause. War in Ukraine, it's a spent cause, Vladimir Zelensky is up to his eyeball in a very ugly corruption scandal right now. He's losing public support at home. Well, he pretty much lost public support at home. His military is falling apart as we speak. The desertions are at multiples the level of last year and the year before that. Soldiers are surrendering in droves because they don't want to fight for a corrupt fascist regime that is primarily focused on war profiteering. Europe's youth isn't buying the pit and this isn't one of them. They're being asked to fight, bleed, and die for a government drowning in corruption scandals and a military that's collapsing under its own weight. Desertions skyrocketing. Soldiers surrendering because they refuse to fight for a regime they see as morally bankrupt. History repeats here too. Armies don't fall first on the battlefield. They fall when morale evaporates, while they are asked to be manning the trenches in the mud and dying for they don't even know what cause. And so it's the Western powers, and I'm talking primarily about London, Paris, and Berlin, are watching their pet projects go down in flames. They are now desperately trying to find a way to keep it going, even at a cost of sacrificing their own population. The British young men, French young men, German young men, Polish young men, elites who cheered this war from comfortable offices, are now willing to sacrifice a generation that never asked for it. All for a cause even they no longer understand. But we must not underestimate them, because throughout history, a small handful of men were able to define the destinies of entire peoples and countries and continents. In the run-up to World War I in 2000, in 1914, anti-war movements absolutely exploded across Europe, especially in countries that were moving towards war. Germany, France, Britain, and Russia as well. So people sensed war coming, and they backed anti-war candidates. But then these anti-war candidates were either compromised or disenfranchised, or somehow, even through assassination, removed from the scenes so that to clear all the obstacles to war, and they saw 7 of their Rhineland-Westphalia candidates drop dead in the space of 2 weeks, a complete, unexplainable anomaly. Look back at 1914. Europe was full of anti-war sentiment. Anti-war candidates were rising everywhere. Germany, France, Britain, Russia. Ordinary people felt what was coming. They tried to stop it. But history doesn't always bow to public opinion. When elites want war badly enough, they find ways to neutralize anyone standing in their path through pressure, political sabotage, disenfranchisement, and sometimes things far darker. And world move on. Most people pretended like that nothing really happened. But this is very dangerous, because we have a handful of very fanatical, devoted war-mongers in power who are working overtime to try to find a way to escalate the war against Russia. So we're not out of danger, but sentiments about Trump administration, that they're fully on board and cooperating with the Russians to prevent World War II from breaking out. Alex isn't praising Russia for ideology. He's stating a strategic fact. The world is safer right now because Russia hasn't taken the bait, and because there are a few adults in the room on the U.S. side who understand what a full-scale war would actually mean. The Trump administration, for all the chaotic insanity of their rhetoric, of their head fakes, and then, distractions, misdirection, and everything that we see coming out of there, the evidence I see strongly suggests that they are earnestly working for peace. And there's a lot of reasons to dispute this. If we're talking about Ukraine, if we're talking about Israel and Iran, if we're talking about Yemen, Venezuela, places like this, because Trump almost deliberately creates time as he's negotiating with his counterparts. And then later you realize, it doesn't seem that he ever had the intention of going to war. On the surface, the Trump administration looked chaotic. Wild rhetoric, sudden pivots, threats followed by handshakes. It all felt like volatility without direction. But underneath that noise, Alex is pointing to something deeper. The difference between performing aggression and pursuing it. But there is one place that is not on anybody's radar, that's not a household name, that Trump gets zero credit for, and that is Bosnia-Herzegovina. And Bosnia-Herzegovina is there, in the heart of the Balkans. This is where, the capital is SVO. People will remember 1914 Sarajevo. This is where World War I was detonated over 110 years ago. And this is where the British have been agitating for war for years now. And this was obvious to everybody. They're pushing us into war. They're provoking all these escalations. This is the same pattern as the pre-tumbleweed Balkans, small territory, local tensions. Major powers manipulating from the outside, and ordinary people watching nervously as foreign hands stir up trouble they never asked for. The British themselves, their think tanks like Russia, Royal United Services, institution, were openly writing about the Balkans being the second front in West's war against Russia. And why? Because the Balkans are a powder cake. You have a lot of different peoples there, and the Bosnia-Herzegovina itself is an amalgamation of Croats who are Catholic, Bosniaks who are Muslim, and Serbians who are Eastern or Serbian Orthodox Christians. And so it's relatively easy to pit these three people against one another by staging provocations. And this was being done, and we watched for the last 2 or 3. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. And I asked him, point blank, face to face, Why don't you know first-person testimony? I asked him, have things changed since Trump came to power? And he shot straight at me. Oh yes, dramatically. He said the situation is day and night. Everything is better. And he even mentioned something about a lithium concession. They were negotiating it with the British. And he said the British were very, hardline, very aggressive, and, unyielding in their demands. He said, now we're dealing with the Americans, and they're much more reasonable, much more accommodating. What does this tell us, Neiman? It tells us that, first of all, the Trump administration had to be aware of they had to have been aware of the problem. They had to have understood what the objectives of the British are, and they had to have come in there and said, you guys are out of here. We're taking over, and there's not going to be war. Krainer isn't talking about diplomacy here. He's describing a direct conversation with a sitting minister in Bosnia's Serbian government. Someone who lives inside the pressure cooker. Someone who knows exactly who is pushing for conflict and who isn't. Because remember, in August of this year, right after the Alaska summit, Carol Dittrith, who is very close with Putin, tweeted a very affirmative statement that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump will prevent World War II from breaking out. And he didn't say should prevent it, might prevent it, could, he said will. And now we're finding out that they have been negotiating in secret all along. And for the first time, we hear voices from Russia saying, we're optimistic about this because it's not just about Ukraine. We're working on a whole new security architecture from Europe, which means that the 2 centuries of British geopolitics, of what they call balance against force, and as soon as one emerges stronger than the other, then they, kind of orchestrate a war to, mow the lawn, I guess, on the continent. We might see an end to this, and we might see a future of peace. Again, I don't think we're out of the woods yet, but this is not random. The diffusing tensions in Bosnia was done deliberately and with knowledge of the situation, and it wasn't done for political points, because, if we're talking about Israel, it's harder to analyze, because there's a strong Israeli lobby in the United States. There's a Christian evangelicals, so everything is very political. Whatever you do, you're appeasing some constituency at home. The situation in Ukraine is also very delicate because it involves all the American traditional allies. So everything they do has to, again, either misdirect or appease Bosnia. Not the case. Nobody cares. Nobody sees it. It's on nobody's radar. Nobody's talking about Bosnia. And the Trump administration doesn't have any audience that they have to appease. They just went there and made peace, or let's say diffused it for the time being. The war tensions, because it was the right thing to do. And I think that's very significant that they deserve credit for it. And it tells me that they understand the nature of the problem and that they are, putting in the good work to prevent war from breaking out. Again, a total war on the European continent would probably be worse than World War I and World War II combined. And Krainer's final warning hits hardest. If a true continental war breaks out now, it wouldn't look like the last two, with modern weapons, modern alliances, and modern vulnerabilities. It could be one chance to pull back from the brink. It looks like Trump and Putin recognized that and acted before anyone else even noticed the cliff.